Sega.
Daytona USA is one of the most well-known Sega racing games of all time. Its combination of Sega's Blue Skies with popular American NASCAR-style racing, wrapped up with drift-heavy handling and rendered using industry-leading 3D hardware, made this game stand out in the arcades. First, we'll look at the original 1994 arcade version running on Sega's Model 2 hardware. This I'll emulate using the Model 2 emulator. Then we'll look at the 1996 standard PC Windows port, essentially a high-resolution version of the Sega Saturn game. This I'll run on Windows 10. Next, we'll look at the extremely rare version optimised for Nvidia's first graphics card, based on the NV1 chipset. This is the first time video of this version has been seen online. We'll then look at Daytona USA Deluxe, released on the PC in 1997, both its original release, which used DirectDraw, as well as how it changed if you installed the Direct3D patch. After that, we'll take a quick look at Daytona USA Deluxe Special Edition from 1998 and discover why it's not really that special. Then we'll head back into the arcades to take a look at Sega Racing Classic, Sega's rebranded version of the game, which lacked the Daytona USA license. This ran on Sega's Ring Edge hardware, and I'm running it using Technoparrot. And finally, we'll touch on Daytona Championship USA from 2017, which was originally going to be called Daytona USA 3. It's essentially a modern remake of the original arcade game, running on PC-based hardware. This one I'm also running under Technoparrot. Daytona USA landed in arcades in 1994 inside a couple of notable cabinet types, both of which could be networked up to 8 players. The larger deluxe cabinet had a huge backlit screen. Both types featured an H-pattern gear shifter and force feedback steering wheel. The game intro sequence blares out an insanely catchy or extremely irritating tune, depending on your musical preference, whilst cars barrel around the 3 circuits in the game. The intro shows the high scores, and also how the 4 VR buttons can be used to switch view. Here's a bit of the second track, and here's a bit of the third track. When you start the game, you choose a track and automatic or manual shifting. We'll begin using automatic transmission at the 3.7 speedway.
Gentlemen, start your engine.
This is a simple, short oval with a tighter final bend featuring a giant Sonic the Hedgehog carved on the wall. You get 8 laps at this track. Here's the bumper view, and here's the cockpit cam. Should you make a mistake and wreck, your car will suffer damage and handle badly. You can pit for repairs, but it takes time. The camera zooms in to hide the car mesh shape magically fixing itself. When you complete the race, you may receive a winning animation if you do well.
Welcome to Victory Lane. You made it!
This is followed by a crude representation of the development team, before the legendary Game Over music. You can then enter your name if you set a particularly fast lap. The second track, Dinosaur Canyon, will tackle with a slightly different coloured manual transmission car. This is one of my favourite tracks in any racing game, as its combination of sweeping turns through a canyon, tunnel, lake, wind turbines, technical bank turn, and rock bridge, let alone massive T-Rex, make this a fun track to drive over 4 laps of competition. The final track is Seaside Street Galaxy, the longest track with just 2 laps. This one starts you out on a giant bridge, takes you through a complex city section, past a massive statue of Jeffrey from Virtua Fighter, through a town, past a massive seagull, back over the bridge, and eventually past a space shuttle and a large sailboat, because why not? The collection of corners here really see the drift mechanic used to the max, not that I'm anywhere near an expert in Daytona USA's unique handling. One thing this game is full of is hidden so-called Easter egg features. Here are just a handful. The 3.7 Speedway has a slot machine that you can actually play by pressing the start button. If you get 3 of the same symbols, you win extra time. Naturally, I'm not very good at this. Another well-known Easter egg is on Dinosaur Canyon, where heading up this ramp backwards tells you you've just lost your sponsors. The statue of Jeffrey can also be manipulated if you park and bash the start button. Plus there are a huge number of hidden musical snippets you can play by entering certain names into the high score table. Here O.R plays a clip from Outrun. The game has many other Easter eggs like extra music tracks, reverse racing, a time attack mode, plus a hidden top-down view if you hold 3 of the VR buttons together. Now, enjoy a minute of the original arcade game with its catchy music without me talking over it.
And they're underway.
The PC port of the game arrived in 1996 and is little more than a higher resolution version of the Sega Saturn release. The box shown here is my own copy in the kind of funky yet fragile cardboard CD holder boxes that Sega used for a few games at that time. The PC version kicks off with some logos, then runs a similar intro attract sequence to the arcade version, albeit at a much lower frame rate, somewhere around 20 to 30 frames per second I estimate. This was one of the earliest Sega PC ports, and I expect the development team were learning as they went, with at least one comment in the help file saying it was the first product they worked on. You can also see that the game ran in a letterbox, presumably to help with the frame rate. When you start the game there are a couple of modes, but we'll go with the arcade original.
Please select a race course.
Like the arcade, you get the rolling start to kick things off. Handling on the keyboard is a little bit twitchier, though Sega controllers and joypads were supported. All the various viewpoints from the arcade are present here, but the draw depth is greatly reduced. As per the arcade, crashes result in an exciting flip, car damage, and the opportunity to pit to get the damage repaired. Likewise, the slot machine is also present on this track and can be played as per the arcade original. Upon finishing the race, you get the same end sequence, though the computer-controlled cars do drive on the grass, and the photo is even more fuzzy. The game over sequence is the same, as are the hidden music tracks on the high score table. Dinosaur Canyon is just as epic as the arcade, and the shorter draw depth isn't too big an issue here, due to the design of the track. I find that the computer-controlled cars do tend to swerve about and change lanes much more chaotically than the arcade version overall though. The Seaside Street Galaxy track is again a fair representation of the arcade original, with the bridge, city, Jeffrey, and town. It does sadly lack the massive seagull though. The space shuttle and sailboat are both present though. After racing around this track for the 2 laps it takes and hitting the odd wall, I eventually make 21st place, yet still get the chance at the high score table, so here's a tune from Afterburner. All the Easter eggs of the arcade are here too, such as losing your sponsors in Dinosaur Canyon, and getting Jeffrey to spin. The PC mode unlocks a raft of cars with different colours and various handling characteristics, plus a couple of horses. It's quite amusing to take to the track as a horse, who can ride on the grass as fast as the track, and yes, you can crash. Here's the horse in the opening intro sequence, which is objectively even more funny. There's a second horse too, with a manual transmission. This one comes in a shade of grey. There are even more Easter eggs hidden in the PC port, including a karaoke mode that doesn't quite work properly. Apart from the frame rate, the PC version doesn't seem that bad, but it does have a noticeable bug. Some of the sound effects, namely your engine rumble at the start, some skidding noises, and worst of all, the echo in the tunnel, don't switch off, meaning the game ends up as a cacophony of noise. A quick fix is to pause and unpause the game, but it slightly breaks the experience. If you had a really low spec computer, the PC version allows you to run the game with wireframes for scenery. This is rather fascinating to see. Dinosaur Canyon in particular starts to feel like an old school wireframe arcade game from the 1980s. And Seaside Street Galaxy's wireframes allow you to see how parts of the track actually connect, such as the rise here, crossover here, and the bridge exit. There's even a wireframe space shuttle. So that's the standard PC port. Watch a minute of this version in action.
1, go! Time extension. We're looking good.
And now we come to the rarest version of Daytona USA. Nvidia's NV1 technology was their very first graphics card and was released on a number of boards including the Diamond Edge 3D and LEDTech WinFast 3D GD400. This rare version also saw a limited commercial release in Japan, as well as being bundled with some Japanese-only NV1 boards. I'm running a copy of the game on my Diamond Edge 3D 3240 XL card, with the captures here coming via a VGA adapter. When you launch the game, the first thing you find is that it's extremely jerky. This might be because I'm running the NV1 board in a much newer Pentium 4, as games like NASCAR Racing on the NV1 play smoother on a Pentium 1, for instance. But as this is the only Sega port with this low frame rate, it might just be because the card is struggling. There is, however, a quick fix, which is to turn off the background skybox. This immediately slams the game into a much higher frame rate, making it very playable. The intro includes all the same content as the standard PC version, and apart from some slightly more warped textures and some breakup between polygons, it's pretty close to the standard release. This runs at 640 by 400 resolution like the standard PC version. I do wonder if the standard PC version, being based on the NV1 version, inherited its letterbox format due to the NV1 only running at that resolution. If you try to play the game with the background on at any setting and hear its highest quality, then it's very hard to play with this awful frame rate. But, as mentioned, turn off the sky altogether and things become pretty good. Overall, there's very little difference to the standard PC version. Winning the race plays the same congratulations sequence, same low resolution team photo, and same Easter egg music clips. Here's Dinosaur Canyon, which is again very close to the standard PC version. But the audio here, played via the NV1 onboard sound chip, has none of the issues with sounds jamming on, so it's better in that respect. Listen to how the tunnel noise stops at the end of the tunnel. At the end of this track, and despite an appalling 12th place, I put in the code for Afterburner to show that works. On to Seaside Street Galaxy, and it's the same story again, very close to the PC standard version. There's no extra gyro shading here as there was in Virtua Fighter Remix, it's just the same as the regular game, with marginally worse textures and less attractive texture warping close to the camera. But what if your computer was terrible? What, apart from lower resolution, are the optimizations available on this version? Well, you can drop the texture quality right down on the track and cars, making it feel like a race through Legoland. It's definitely a novel experience. Here's Dinosaur Canyon, looking much more like Minecraft. And here's Seaside Street Galaxy with the bare minimum textures. If you like squares, you're well catered for. However, being an early release, as this one predated the standard PC version slightly, the game is prone to the odd crash, and I don't mean cars flying through the sky. Watch this.
Start your engine. Start your engine.
Oops. And here's an even better one. I particularly like the groo sound as it crashes.
Start your engine. Start your engine.
There is one really interesting thing about this version though. It runs in a window with scalability. This means you can drag it up to 800 by 600 resolution, the highest resolution Daytona USA has ever been on the PC. I've hidden the borders here. As you can see, the frame rate possibly drops a touch, but it's a little bit sharper. Here's Dinosaur Canyon at the higher resolution. You can hear the car engine noise struggling a bit more here as the higher resolution is taking its toll on this old card. Finally, here's the third track, and once again it's a touch sharper, but not by a huge amount, and it really struggles in the city. Now I'll switch back to the standard resolution so you can watch a minute of this version without me talking over it.
3, 2, 1, go! You can take it. Time extension. Looking good. Time extension.
Stung by criticism of the initial Daytona USA release on the Sega Saturn, Sega turned to the development team behind the Saturn port of Sega Rally Championship and reworked the game into Daytona USA Championship Circuit Edition. This was then ported to the PC as Daytona USA Deluxe in 1997. These are my actual copies of the game shown here in the big box original release. Initially the game only supported non-3D accelerated DirectDraw for graphics. We'll look at that version first before seeing what changes the later Direct3D Patch brought. The game begins with the Sega, Sega Sports and Daytona licensing logos, and then this all-new intro sequence with a proper squealing rock track over it, explaining how the drivers are sons of angels or something. The intro then goes through all the tracks in the game: Dinosaur Canyon, Seaside Street Galaxy, the new tracks, National Park Speedway and Desert City, and finally the PC exclusive track called Silver Ocean Causeway. When you start the game you can see there's a number of modes. We'll go for Arcade and the 3.7 Speedway. I've picked the automatic Hornet car and not tweaked any of the new car settings page. The first thing you see is that the car looks nothing like the arcade original, but if you win enough races you unlock the original Hornet. As a bonus car called Daytona. It has maxed out statistics though, so you won't see this one drifting like the arcade original, unless you change the car settings a lot. This game does have full screen graphics rather than the letterbox seen on the original Daytona USA on the PC. The textures are bigger and bolder, but the track has a weird blocky look up close, almost as though it's rendered in voxels or something. The draw depth isn't hugely better than the original PC version though. Similar to the original, a big crash warps your car, and a visit to the pits makes it all better. And likewise, the slot machine mechanic is present and correct, though the key used to play it also switches views, which is a bit awkward. When you win, which you will do with the maxed out Daytona car, you get a rockier game over page, a new congratulations movie with developer credits and no fuzzy photograph, before some long unskippable credits which largely summarise the same thing again. Then you get to the high score table and find out that the hidden music clips aren't present here, sad face. There is however a full replay mode with its own squealing rock track to highlight the action. It's okay, I guess. Moving on, let's take a look at how Dinosaur Canyon looks in this version. It's re-rendered in chunky, wobbly polygon style. I kinda prefer the original more. There's some notable breakup on the track polygons in the distance, which is a bit unpleasant. Just like the original, you're told you lost your sponsors if you enter the tunnel, though it's a fair bit harder to read here. Moving on to Seaside Street Galaxy, the track has again received the same glow up as the previous two, but here feels strangely more cartoon-like than the original arcade. The track really suffers from the short draw depth. There's also again no massive seagull. But the space shuttle and sailboat are both present. Rather than spinning, Jeffrey does a front flip on this version, but again the button changes views at the same time. This game has 3 extra tracks not seen in the arcade. I'll just cover them quickly as we're comparing the arcade version here. National Park Speedway has a large theme park alongside the track with a working roller coaster. This track reappeared in Daytona USA 2001 on the Dreamcast, but the roller coaster isn't in that version. The 5th track is another that returned in the Dreamcast only Daytona USA 2001, called Desert City. You start by racing a train, then sweep around a lot of rocky hills. The final track is the most interesting as it's exclusive to the PC version. Silver Ocean Causeway is a sweeping track around and over an ocean. It feels like a cousin to Seaside Street Galaxy. There's a mean final turn. One interesting thing here is the tunnel sequence. On the first lap it shows planets and comets. On lap 2 it's fireworks. Lap 3 has fighter jets. Lap 4 shows the space scene again, before fireworks as you cross the line at the end. A neat touch. One thing that is quite hidden is the time of day switching. By holding various buttons when starting a track, you can race in twilight, floodlights, midnight, dawn, and midsummer. These are mainly tweaks to the palette, but some feature bespoke backgrounds. Let's watch a minute of the DirectDraw version in action.
1, and they're underway.
short while later, Sega issued a Direct3D patch for the game, which changed things up a bit. Let's take a look. The opening intro shows how they added perspective correction, filtering, and an optional fog effect. It makes the game look a bit sharper overall. You'll note I'm not using the anti-aliasing here, which can be used, but the standard game in Windows 10 chops off the top of the picture, and using DG Voodoo 2 to fix that causes anti-aliasing to heavily break up in the distance, so I decided to disable it here. When you start a race, you now choose time of day right from the off. We'll stick with daytime though, like the arcade. The Direct3D version looks a bit tidier, with no chunky wobbling textures. However, the perspective correct does mess up the reinforcement bars on the rear window of the bonus Daytona car here. There's also no in-car view, as large bitmaps were hard to do on early Direct3D graphics cards. Need for Speed 2 Special Edition also lost its in-car cockpit view due to the same issue. Here's a short part of Dinosaur Canyon. I don't think the fogging really helps much, as the background needs to be lighter for things to blend in better perhaps. One thing that's not immediately apparent here is that the textures on the Direct3D version have also been reduced in quality. This was again common at the time, as you'll see in some other early Sega Direct3D games that we'll be looking at in the near future. Here's a quick look at National Park Speedway in Direct3D. The fogging really doesn't work well here due to the dark hillside in the background. Desert City's choice of brown fog actually works quite well, as it feels more correct in a way. Finally we come to Silver Ocean Causeway. The same generally applies to this track, reduced texture quality and fogging that only just works. But this track also features another change. The tunnel now only features planets and comets. I presume switching textures was a no-no on Direct3D cards at that time. Easter egg wise, the horses are back, and you can tweak their performance too if you wish. Here's the grey one having a run around the 3.7 Speedway. Whoops! And here's a quick look at how the time of day changes fare in Direct3D. This is twilight, where the fogging is awful. And this is floodlit, where the fogging works really well. Here's midnight, where the fogging provides a weird yellow glow on the horizon. And this is dawn, where the orange fogging works really well again, actually. Finally, midsummer makes things super bright. Yet as the background isn't affected, it looks pretty bad. Anyway, let's now watch a minute of the Direct3D patched version.
3, 2, 1, now they're underway.
You're looking good.
Final lap.
You're looking good. Great, your time has been extended. You can take it.
In 1998, Sega joined forces with the Skittles Racing team in order to release a free Daytona USA Deluxe Special Edition. Whilst this sounds super exciting, it's little more than a single track demo. The intro now has an extra Skittles Racing Team logo, and the Hornet car has been replaced with the Skittles branded car. Even the title screen has an updated car texture, which is kind of funky. When you start the game, you only have access to arcade and records, and then you only get Dinosaur Canyon and the Skittles car. Right away, two things become apparent. Firstly, the Mahusive rainbow added in the background, and also that this is the standard DirectDraw version of the game, which is a little strange given the Direct3D patch was already out. Perhaps the car textures render in higher quality in DirectDraw, or perhaps they just wanted as many people to be able to play it as possible. It's a full conversion though. Even the in-car view has a Skittles bonnet, and there are more Skittles ads around the track. Even the checkpoint flags have Skittles on. It's pretty cool that they even added a little Skittles car icon to the high score table. And the replay lets you see all that Skittles goodness all over again. Race the rainbow! They missed out on that slogan idea, clearly. So here's a minute of this special version.
And they're underway.
Heading back to the arcades in 2009, Sega reissued Daytona USA, but without the Daytona USA license, on the new Sega Ring Edge hardware. They called this Sega Racing Classic, and basically just shuffled out any references to the real-life event, including some of the singing in the soundtrack. The game was released in a couple of cabinet types, both of which could be networked together, as per the original Model 2 version. When Sega regained the Daytona USA license, this was the version that made it to the PlayStation and Xbox platforms, but not the PC for some reason. The game is so close to the arcade that I suspect some form of emulation is being used. It now runs in widescreen though, at a full 60 frames per second, where the original ran at just over 57 FPS. The new title screen is pretty dramatic. Now, you might think that the colours are a bit washed out here. That's because I'm running this via Technoparrot on an Nvidia card, and you have to compromise on the graphics, otherwise there will be flickering red textures all over the track. It's not hugely affected, apart from the reflection of clouds on the car windows being mostly grey, as well as somewhat flatter lighting on your car, but the gameplay remains the same. Starting the first track, you'll see the black inside the car wheel arches showing through the body. This was also in the Model 2 original, hence me thinking emulation may be involved here. The music on this version is tweaked a fair bit, and the background sky is redrawn in higher resolution, but overall it's very close to the original Model 2 version. Winning the race sees the same sequences, though the music is generally a lot louder here. The Easter egg music clips are present too. Speaking of the audio mix, the voices are a lot quieter than the music. This might be due to how the Ring Edge system mixed the audio, perhaps parts were meant to play in different speakers. As we head through the canyon, watch the clouds on the car window. Briefly they turn blue, so the lighting is definitely not quite right with the Nvidia fix in Technoparrot. This track's soundtrack suffers the most, as the original called out Daytona in the lyrics. The third track again has the same upgrades, with a sharper, more defined background sky, and not a huge amount of changes otherwise. At least the cheesy music isn't compromised here, as there's no name drop for Daytona. The massive seagull makes a reappearance, as this version is pretty much identical to the Model 2 version. The car shadow also flickers as per the original arcade, and the big message on the left advertising Model 2 is still present. However, my driving ability on this one is much worse, and I come in a lowly 18th place. Anyway, here's a minute of this widescreen version in action. 2017, Sega was planning to release Daytona USA 3, but I guess someone pointed out it wasn't really hugely different to the original, so they rebranded it to the somewhat clumsy Daytona Championship USA instead. This one comes in a couple of cabinet types, both of which can be networked for multiplayer thrills. This one runs on PC-based hardware. In 2020, Sega issued a new season edition that tweaks the handling and lighting around the tracks, but I'm only going to look at the original release here, just out of interest, so you can see how it compares to the Model 2 arcade original. Essentially, it's a modern remake of Daytona USA. As the game begins, you can immediately see how heavily reworked the graphics are, with a more modern stock car model, higher resolution textures, increased draw depth, and a lot more scenery around the track. You can also have your face photographed and put into the game. When you start the game, you can now choose between Quick Race and Multi-Race Championship. There are now 6 tracks in this game, but they're not really all unique, as you'll see in a minute. Let's take on 3.7 Speedway with the manual, original Hornet-styled car. The music here has been re-recorded and amped up to the max. There's also a more modern display along the side and bottom of the screen to show where you are relative to your rivals. This was aping the presentation of modern NASCAR races on TV. Overall, this plays a lot like the original. I'm not sure if I'm entirely on board with the new budget PC game presentation, but it's okay. As per the original, you can have a massive crash and pit for repairs. The pit crew here is much better modelled and animated though. One thing that is a disappointment here is that Sega removed the slot machine. The 3.7 Speedway title no longer makes sense. It's now an advertising board. I expect this was so they didn't fall foul of any claim that the game had a gambling component. When you finish the race, you get a different tune to celebrate. And a funkier game over tune.
G-A-M-E-O-V-E-R.
Game over.
Game over.
But at least they kept the hidden bonus sound clips. Here's Outrun again.
O.R.
Moving on to Dinosaur Canyon, this one only has more modern shaped stock cars to pick from. It's also been heavily reworked. The game by default only gives you 3 laps now, instead of the 4 that the original Model 2 version had. Outside the tunnel are some hang gliders and a model of the Grand Canyon, which is pretty neat. The rock arch is now full of fossils, and there are more dinosaurs on the back wall. I'm not totally sold on the more orange and less tall canyon walls, but it's overall pretty nice. The message about losing your sponsors is still here. And when I finish, I get to play the Afterburner clip.
A.B.
Next up is Seaside Street Galaxy. This one is possibly the biggest glow up of all the tracks. The opening bridge now looks much more like the Brooklyn Bridge in New York, and the city skyscraper is visible from anywhere around the track. The city is more complex, and the TV screens in the tunnel are cool. The statue is now Akira instead of Jeffrey, but you can still make him spin, but not flip upside down. Though the button also makes the list of rivals pop in and out. As you descend into the town, you can see how the extended draw depth really changes things here. You'll also realise you only have 1 lap at this track, which is a bit disappointing. The massive seagull is still present, but it's much reduced in size. One thing that's properly epic though, is that the space shuttle now actually takes off. It's so cool that I crash watching it. The final run up to the sailboat is a lot more colourful. Otherwise, it's pretty similar to the original arcade, and I shuffle home in a lowly 22nd place. I still get to enter my name, but it no longer plays the Power Drift sample, sadly. The next track we'll look at is the Daytona International Speedway. This is very similar to the 3.7 Speedway, except the Daytona singing has been utterly maxed out. Just listen. It gets even more crazy. Then start singing about how far behind you are. Just pure joy, or irritation, depending on how you take the soundtrack. The other tracks are slightly disappointing. Lakeside Castle Speedway is essentially a mirrored version of Dinosaur Canyon, with completely remodelled scenery and some somewhat annoying lighting. As the original Dinosaur Canyon was one of my favourite tracks in any game, this one just isn't as good, and the music is a bit bland. At least I get a clip from Virtua Fighter.
B.F.
Similarly, the Metro City track is a mirrored and remodelled version of Seaside Street Galaxy. However, unlike Lakeside Castle Speedway, I feel this one worked out pretty well. They've essentially ported the track into Chicago with rising bridges and underpasses. When you descend into Memorial Park, it gets quite difficult to work out which part of a mirrored Seaside Street Galaxy you're now on. And the latter half of the track, with more varied city scenery, is pretty nice too. Overall, I don't mind this track, although I only make it to 20th place. At least I get to play a clip of music from Fantasy Zone.
F.C.
Now, enjoy a minute of this version. Let's now compare the games at the pixel level. I've captured these at their native resolution, though, as mentioned, I didn't capture Daytona USA Deluxe with anti-aliasing enabled due to graphical breakup. The NV1 shots I've also centred on a black screen instead of running them in a window, and scaled them up so they compare to the PC port better. Let's get cracking. First, here's the original Model 2 arcade at 777 Speedway. Note how low resolution this actually was, just 496 by 384 pixels. I ran the game without anti-aliasing, as footage from the real arcade seems to lack it. I also enabled some mip mapping to make the distant track a bit blurry, as per the arcade. The arcade actually used trilinear filtering, but in the Model 2 emulator, enabling that ends up cutting off background scenery early, and some items go see-through. Wiping across to the standard PC port, you can see how the colours are a little different, and the draw depth is also reduced. Wiping to the NV1 version at 640 by 400, you can see how texture quality was reduced again, particularly the background sky, track, and car textures. And wiping to the NV1 version with the window stretched out to 800 by 600 resolution sharpens things up fractionally. Going back to the Model 2 arcade, let's now wipe across to Daytona USA Deluxe, and you'll see it's slightly less colourful with a higher camera position. Switching to the Direct3D Patch, and you can see that the fogging isn't great, whilst the car window looks odd. But this version also applies filtering selectively. If you study the road up ahead, you can see it's not actually filtered, nor is the Gallop logo on the car, but the closest textures are, as is the Hornet logo. It's an interesting choice. Going back to the Model 2 version again, now let's wipe across to Sega Racing Classic, and you can see how the lighting isn't quite right on Technoparrot when using the Nvidia fix for the red flickering track issue. The game is higher resolution though, with extended draw depth and sharper sky textures. And finally, let's wipe across to Daytona Championship USA, and everything is vastly different. Next, let's go to Dinosaur Canyon on Model 2 hardware. Wiping across to the PC standard version, you can see it's not too bad overall, with even a similar draw depth. The NV1 version has lower resolution textures and more warping on the road close to the camera. At 800 by 600 it's a little sharper, for instance the flagpoles in the distance. Let's go back to the Model 2 original, and now wipe across to Daytona USA Deluxe, you can see it's a much darker experience. Now let's bring in the Skittles Special Edition. You get a rainbow, Skittles coloured flags, the Skittles branded car, and even some Skittles logos on the start banner. Going back to the standard version of Daytona USA Deluxe, now I'll wipe across to the Direct3D port. Look at how the start banner gets much lower resolution in particular. Here's the Model 2 version again. Now if we wipe over to Sega Racing Classic, you can see it uses a high resolution sky and everything looks much crisper. Ignore the lighting issues on the car again though. Moving to Daytona Championship USA, and this section is almost unrecognisable, with a radically different castle, cliffs, boat, and much more incidental scenery in the pit lane. The more modern stock car model also isn't quite as appealing. Finally, here's the start of Seaside Street Galaxy on the original arcade version. Wiping to the PC port again, it's pretty accurate. The NV1 version again features lower quality textures throughout, whilst the 800x600 scaled up version allows you to see a few more pixels of the bridge supports and road lines in the distance. Back to the arcade, so we can wipe over to Daytona USA Deluxe, and it feels very different. Either the camera view is shorter or the track is modelled differently, but it almost feels like a toy car version of the circuit. Once again, the Direct3D Patch smooths things out a bit, whilst making the start banner look awful. Back to the original again. Wiping across to Sega Racing Classic adds the distant bridge support, along with a revised sky texture. Otherwise, it's pretty close to the original. And finally, here's Daytona Championship USA with its heavily remodelled bridge. Let's now put all 8 versions of the game head to head. I'll compare each of the arcade tracks in order, except for Daytona USA Deluxe Special Edition, which only features Dinosaur Canyon. The original Model 2 arcade game was revolutionary, looking and still sounding like nothing else out there at the time. It's still a great game to play, even now. The PC standard port is a bit less fun to play with its lower frame rate and letterbox display, but it handles like the arcade. It's just a shame some of the audio effects don't switch off when they're supposed to. The NV1 version was fascinating to try out as it marginally predates the standard release. It is, however, pretty compromised in the frame rate department, which is possibly why it didn't see a wider release in the US or Europe. Daytona USA Deluxe feels a bit dumbed down compared to the original arcade. It's nice to have full screen graphics, but the track textures aren't quite up to the original. The 3 new tracks are pretty good though. The Direct3D patch helps in some areas, but fails in others. I can't even be sure if I'd recommend it over the non-Direct3D version, but I believe it also added better force feedback to the game, so there is that to consider. Daytona USA Deluxe Special Edition isn't special at all, except it's fun to see, which you now have. Sega Racing Classic is so close to the arcade that it must feature some emulation, possibly even from the developer of the Model 2 emulator, given he started working at Sega. And Daytona Championship USA is better than I thought it was the first time I played it, but it's not really as classic as the original game. Overall, if I had to pick a version to play, I'd recommend the arcade original via the Model 2 emulator. If the graphic issues on Nvidia cards could be worked around better, then Sega Racing Classic might get the nod. But as you can add widescreen and high resolution to the Model 2 emulator, as well as it supporting force feedback out of the box, it'd still get the nod. Of the PC versions, I have a soft spot for the original standard Windows version, despite its audio bugs. The NV1 version is interesting, but I wouldn't rush to get one of those cards solely for this game. Daytona USA Deluxe is okay, it's fine, but not really that special, whilst the arcade Daytona Championship USA is definitely worth a go, but I prefer the classic to the remake. If you like this comparison of Daytona USA, then give it a like. Or subscribe, ring the bell, leave a comment, and join me next time to shoot some bad guys.